Welcome to my live around sacred sexuality and soul contracts and sexuality. So, okay, let me explain to you what's inspired me to want to do this little live stream this afternoon. Okay, here we go with what's inspired me. This afternoon, I saw a group which labels itself conscious dating on Facebook. And there was a sketch that was used for describing, conscious sexuality. And this sketch was a very heavily pencil drawing of a woman. And then the man drawn more in an outline. And the woman was face down, and it was very much her bottom was extended upwards, and he was sat on top of her, and he had his hands, you could see it was trying to depict that his hands were very tight around her throat, pulling her head backwards. And to me that looked like a woman who was being controlled and dominated, and you could say it was ambiguous, whether she'd consented to that or not. But in a dating group that was portraying itself to be conscious dating, I felt the image was perhaps inappropriate and looked like she was being dominated and controlled. And a couple of other people felt the same as me, and I shared my opinion. And then some guy came heavy down on me, attacking me. And I defended myself, and I said he was bullying. And then the admins thought that I was wrong, and so my comment was removed. So then I put the image on my Facebook page and invited comments about what did people think about this image. And it was very interesting. And remember, my background is 20 years of my own conscious spiritual journey, but also 20 years of almost unwittingly becoming a trauma therapist, dealing with people who've been abused sexually, mentally, emotionally, getting out of abusive situations, having been through some of those experiences myself in this lifetime, and certainly in past lives, being in myriad abusive situations, and just opening up what is sacred sexuality. And, I feel like the barometer of sexuality is getting very, very skewed, and young people are getting very misunderstood about what sexuality is, and what is, even if it's consensual, even if it's consensual sexuality, have we not lost the connection to our sacred heart, and without meaning this to be religious, I just don't have a better metaphor for what I'm going to say. In the Garden of Eden sexuality, for want of a better word, that is not meaning to put that under any religious umbrella. Why do we have to portray, obviously we've fallen from grace somewhere, that we struggled to see nakedness in just a purity, like a purity of being. And in my post, there was a lady who, the thing is though, from my perspective, it gets predictable. It gets really predictable what's going to happen. And when we start asking questions of what is acceptable sexually and what's not acceptable sexually, a story that comes to mind is a client that I had who was a very high power, successful businessman many years ago. And he came to see me for help around sexuality. Well, over the sessions, it transpired that he'd never had sex with a woman, but he did like being spanked with his clothes on. And he liked to employ women. Say he would employ someone, let's say, for fitness training because he was quite overweight. Or he would employ a woman to teach him the piano, and he liked to manipulate women into spanking him. It sounds laughable, and on some level it's a comedy, but on another level it's really tragic that this guy's only form of sexual expression and power and domination over women was to employ them for something that seemed quite innocent, like fitness training, or piano teaching, and then to manipulate them into spanking him and offering them £1,000 a time to spank him. And, I was having none of that, because I wanted to help him to have a fulfilling sexually intimate relationship with another being. And it turns out that in his childhood, his mother was very dominating and controlling, and he couldn't get his way in overpowering her because she would overpower him. So they were in this dysfunctional relationship together. But he found his power by dominating and controlling his aunt, by gaslighting her into being angry with him. And then she would take off her high heel shoe and smack him with this shoe. And he would find that sexually gratifying. And that was as far as his sexuality ever went until he became an adult. And he'd never had sex when I saw him. And then when we were getting to the point of actually clearing his issues, which he was very resistant to, he disappeared, and he appeared a few years later saying, "I know you won't approve," but it was like, I'm not in the position to want to judge you. I'm neutral to your story, because again, you're trying to gaslight me now to be angry with you, which I'm not falling for. But he said he'd found a group of people to be friends with because he didn't have friends, and the commonality of the group that all went to art galleries and things like that was they all liked being spanked. And it was sad, because on one level, it's not like it was really gratuitously getting worse and worse. But it's tragic that we have this barometer of sexuality, that we're normalizing gratuitous behavior towards each other, whether that's men or women. We're normalizing violent, aggressive, controlling behavior and saying that that's sexuality. It's not. It's abuse and it's control. And this kind of train is just rolling on into, ever more dysfunctional situations. So to find a group that tries to call itself conscious dating or awake dating, to me, depicting a man dominating and controlling, perhaps suffocating a woman, is nothing conscious about that. And either way, if it was the other way around, the woman suffocating the man, that would not be acceptable. How have we drifted as a species into this form of gratuitous behavior? And then there was another lady who she liked the picture. She said she couldn't see anything wrong with the picture. And then, of course, I knew my reply would offend her, because I looked at her profile picture, and of course, it's going to offend people. And possibly what I'm going to say now is going to offend some of you. Post in the comment section if you feel you want to say something. So she was portraying herself with piercings over her body and tattoos, and in an outfit that was, last seen in some bordello, brothel, that kind of image. And she dyed her hair red, and it was all coiffured, and it looked like she was in some kind of past life bordello life. And then a cross between being covered in tattoos. If we look at the origin of tattoos in themselves, I know some people will say ancient tribes used to tattoo themselves. But predominantly in the Western culture, we would tattoo sailors and prisoners, slaves. We would tattoo slaves and prisoners. That was where tattoos came into being, identifying them. So how have we in a culture drifted into covering ourselves in tattoos? And it's painful, I believe, to do that. I've never done that. It's not something I'm drawn to. But when I've spoken to young people, very young people, because as we all know, we look at young people now, majority of them are covered in tattoos. I've looked at young girls in the spa when I've gone swimming, and I'm like, you've got like paper doilies tattooed on the tops and backs of your legs. You're covered in tattoos. One, you've spent a lot of money to do this. It's not cheap. It's at least £1,000 an arm, depending on what artist you use. And I understand there's a great skill in this level of art, the same with piercings. But this is, from my perspective, a mutilation of your body. And from my perspective, a way of you to try to process some deep-rooted emotional trauma that you are possibly in denial of. And when you look at the tattoos, you can often see that they relate to past lives. Perhaps they relate to emotional issues or things that you're trying to work through, or things that you've identified with as comfortable in your childhood that maybe took you out of the pain that you were suffering as a child. So you identify with these cartoons, so maybe you know, tattooed those on your body. There's a myriad of reasons. And then people have rightly said, well, ancient cultures did that. But does that mean that it's right? You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's beneficial for us to cover ourselves in these tattoos on our bodies. So digressing slightly. So the lady, I then replied this to the lady, and the lady said, no, she wasn't offended by me sharing my truth. And I said, oh, that's great. And then I looked and she blocked me. So, you know, that would portray to me that actually she was offended. She had got upset by what I'd said, but actually maybe that was triggering a deep healing in her. Maybe there is some deep trauma that needs looking at. You know, and I often see women who constantly complain about the men that they attract. And then you only need to look at someone's Facebook profile to see, to see how they put themselves across, you know. And you think, well, you know, most of your pictures look like, you know, you wouldn't be out of place in a pornography magazine. So, you know, when you portray yourself, you know, sort of, and, you know, remember I had a background of modeling. So I know how we portray ourselves calls in what we're doing. So if you're like all pouty, I mean, I can't even do that. It's not something I can do, but all that, you know, and, you know, clothes hanging off and temptress eyes, woo, you know, you're going to attract a certain kind of guy, you know, who reacts to that. And then they wonder why they're not necessarily happy in that relationship. So it's, you know, the difference between abusive sexuality over sacred sexuality. And then when we start to, you know, we're in this realm now, especially with masks and things like that. You know, I don't think anybody's idea of us wearing masks comes from a loving, benevolent, divine, masculine or divine aspect. I think it comes from patriarchy in its truest sense, which patriarchy in its truest sense is masculine and feminine abuse. It's not male or female, it's abuse on both levels. And we're normalizing abuse. We're normalizing graphic pornography. Young people, because of their access to the internet, they're not learning about sexuality necessarily through their parents. And, you know, when I was at school a long time ago, you know, people would come and give you sex education lessons. But I had seen some magazines that had floated around some other children that were quite graphic, but perhaps not as bad as what young people are being exposed to nowadays. And they're being forced to be sexual maybe before they would really want to be if they weren't being bullied by their peer group. So, you know, I don't believe in the Garden of Eden, that we came here without a religious Garden of Eden, but just a beautiness of ourselves. Hold on, I'm going to, I've started chatting away and I'm not plugged in. Hold on 1 second, it's gonna, let me just plug this in so I won't lose my connection. Sorry. So, you know, I don't think really did we come here to, you know, and I see people who might, from my perspective, must be in absolute pain and suffering. They've injected and put like balls under their skin, so they're like horns, and they've tattooed all their body and pierced all their body. Please don't tell me those people don't have pain or suffering somewhere in their Akashic records of their soul. They do. They're obviously tied into some dark, lower dimensional entities or lifetimes of great suffering that they haven't cleared yet. And they, you know, are trying to work through that, or they feel very connected to lizards. They can't connect with humans, so they're trying to make themselves look like a lizard because maybe the pain that they've experienced with humans is too much, so they want to identify as a lizard now. You know, when we try to go into why are you doing this to yourself, and of course, you know, people don't like to think that, you know, it's very hard to get rid of all these tattoos once you've done this, you know, and with piercings. But you know, my beginning of this conversation wasn't really around tattoos and piercings because people will get offended, and I've talked about this in the past, and it had completely the wrong thing that happened. A girl was so annoyed with what I was saying, although I was typing it on the internet, that she went off and got a tattoo. And I was like, oh, that wasn't my intention. It was almost like as me holding this mother energy in this rejection of me trying to be the loving, kind mother. It was like she rejected it and was like, I will defy you and go and get a tattoo anyway. So my whole intention kind of backfired on me slightly. Let me just look at your comments in case anyone's got something. Thank you for your kind comments anyway. Let's see what you're all saying. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I do have that wholesome. It's just, I have a deep sadness for humanity that this gratuitous, violent, aggressive sexuality has been portrayed as the norm, and also misunderstanding Tantra. You know, many years ago, there was a DVD I saw, and I did meet this guy because I used to spend a lot of time in Sedona, and I didn't really have a conversation with him as such. I just said hello, and the people I was with knew him, and he ran this tantric temple in Sedona, and I saw his DVD, and from my perspective, it was hilarious. It's called Sex Magic or something, and it was cringeworthy at best and tragic at worst, because it was trying to depict his story of being this very good-looking, older, attractive man who was a tantric healer and had sex with these women to heal them. Well, he was a good-looking man, so of course, no wonder these women would want to have sex with him. And, you know, did he heal them of their sexual issues? I don't know. I'm sure, you know, if they were frigid with somebody else, perhaps it was because they didn't want to be with that guy. I don't know whether having sex with him would definitely help them. I mean, in past lives, we used to work in tantric temples where we would take men into their hearts by having sex with the priestesses, and many of the priestesses would have husbands or partners at home and children, and they were expected to serve in the tantric temples. And so in this DVD that I watched, he finally fell in love with a girl that he really liked called Maya, and she was not comfortable with the level of promiscuity that he had and the justification that this was his job to have sex with all these women. And it wasn't violent, aggressive sex, don't get me wrong. There was nothing, but it was came across as very beautiful, very gentle, very loving, very kind. And she left him, and he was just devastated. You saw him crying. He was heartbroken in the DVD. And so his mind thought, how am I going to get her back? I know, I'll do a sex magic ritual to get her back. Now, her reason for leaving was because she couldn't deal with the promiscuity of him sleeping with all these women. So to get her back, he had sex with another woman to kind of conjure up some kind of spell to bring her back. Right, so she's left you because of your promiscuity. So you go off and have sex with some random woman to do some kind of sex spell to get her back. Yeah, that's really going to work. I think she's going to love that. So can you see how confused as humans we are? And these are not the ones who are hurting each other. You know, they're not hurting each other. They may be emotionally hurting each other, but they're not physically hurting each other. You know, like this image, the pencil drawing that I talked about at the beginning of this, you know, strangling someone, pulling their head back and pinning them down from behind as a pencil drawing looks to me like a domination of a woman, whether the image was vice versa. So let's see what everybody's saying. Someone's saying people end up looking the same haircut, same whatever. I feel that deep sadness too. I don't. Yes. I mean, humanity are lost. I mean, let's not get this wrong. Humanity are deeply wounded and lost. And the problem that we have, and this is the period we're at now on the 3rd of June, 2021, is, in our desire to ignore our trauma, we will normalize things. That's why we have fetish clubs. If your first experience of human touch when you were born was a pair of plastic gloves, you remember back in the day they used to hold a baby upside down and smack its bottom. If that was your first experience of human touch and the nurse or the doctor had plastic gloves on, then you're probably going to get off on being spanked. Now, does that make that loving and kind? No. What does that tell us? That when babies are born, we shouldn't hold them upside down in plastic gloves and spank their bottoms. And I think we don't do that anymore. We don't hold them upside down and spank their bottoms anymore. But, there is a generation of people that happened to, and those people, because maybe their mother didn't hold them close to her breast, maybe they were bottle fed, maybe they weren't held skin to skin, so they have associated with rubber and latex as comforting, and maybe the teat on the plastic bottle that they were sucking from as a baby, because maybe they weren't put to their mother's breast, that feels comforting for them, so they like plastic and latex. Do you see how we're on this sliding scale of gratuity and aggressiveness and harshness? And I don't think that was the intention for humanity to be like that. There was a great guy, I can't remember his name now, he's passed away, and he was Australian, and I think he wrote a book called The Art of Making Love. And I think his name was Barry Long. That's it, Barry Long. And he apologized on behalf of men. I'm sure you can watch him on YouTube still, on how he apologized for the aggressive, violent behavior of men towards women in sexuality. The tragedy that I'm trying to express in this, that many women were defending what looked like domination and control as being okay. And I think many women live either physically, mentally, or emotionally in abusive relationships because they're frightened. They're either so dumbed down or repressed, or in denial of their repression or dumbed down, that they're frightened that how would they survive without this dominating, abusive person. I can tell you, as somebody who has lived my life predominantly since I've owned a property, since I've owned my own property, I've lived predominantly on my own, and I don't have a sibling, or my parents are quite elderly, so any jobs or work that have had to be done around my house, I've had to employ somebody to come and do and pay them money. I can't just get somebody to do stuff. So, a lot of people, women, are unaware of the chores and things that you have to do around the house, and actually if they didn't have this husband who was either providing the money or actually doing the jobs and chores around the house, they'd have to do all this stuff themselves. And maybe some women have lots of children and they think, gosh, how would I cope mentally, financially without this care? This help, whether it's financial or physical help with the children. Somebody could be a great dad, but not necessarily be a great partner. The same with women, could be abusive to men. So I just wanted to open up this whole discussion around, what is sexuality in its purest sense. Surely it's to take us back to our heart and to be in love and divinity. And this is very personal, but I also was triggered this morning because I saw an ex of mine that I was very briefly engaged to. On day 4 of me really having spent time with them in the physical realm, having dated them sort of online really, I knew it was toxic and I said they need to leave, but they'd actually talked their way around with me. And by the 8th day, I was actually engaged to them, so we can be very manipulated. Now, that person wasn't physically abusive in any way, shape or form. But I would say in retrospect, they were a spiritual narcissist. And, some of you may well have come across their work. And I was intrigued by that somebody who I found particularly toxic and not positive to have in my life. And it only took me a few weeks to get that person out of my life, because I don't think they knew who they were. They were sort of like one of those people who, whoever you put them next to, they become like that person. But in my experience with that person, I wasn't even sure whether they were straight or gay. And, some people might say, well, it's okay to be bisexual, but I would prefer to be with somebody who is predominantly heterosexual. That's my preference. But this person had said he'd only experienced sacred sexuality and truly being his heart and love with a man, and I was like, well, that would lead me to believe that you're gay. So why do you really want to be with me? And I think he wanted to be with me, which again opens up another subject that I have huge question marks over, which is about twin flames. A lot of people say, oh, it's my twin flame, I have to tolerate this. It's because we're twin flames, we must battle on and stay together and work through this, when actually it's a toxic, dysfunctional relationship. And in the broadest sense of being a twin flame or a soulmate, or however you want to describe it, might be somebody you have a previous lifetime connection with, and that this magnetic connection to knowing them just needs to be explored into turning into a sacred, neutral relationship where you both go, you know what, this was just some past life overlay, or like a magnet was something unresolved from my childhood or my ancestral lineage, and something in your childhood and your ancestral lineage that was unresolved, that created like a cosmic connection or a mirror for us. Or maybe we knew each other from some past life that we hadn't resolved, or maybe we know each other from a galactic timeline and we just need to resolve this. We don't need to force ourselves to stay together because we feel some connection, which we've now turned into, we're twin flames, like there's only one person in the world. And this gentleman that I just talked about, he was convinced we're twin flames, blah blah blah, but now he's with this other woman, she's the twin flame and I'm just forgotten about, like he doesn't want to remember that he ever thought anyone else was a twin flame. So I can see the irony in all of this and the hilarity in misunderstood spirituality and the denial of the emotional self and the denial of the wounded inner child, which many people on the spiritual path have a denial of their own wounding. And then they create all these kind of spiritual beliefs to live from, so they don't have to actually work through the really deep, painful, wounded stuff, and they turn that into some kind of polyamorous relationship or some form of tantra. And even polyamory or polyandry, I think polyandry is when it's I think polyandry is a woman with two men, and then two men with one woman is polyamory. I think I may be wrong about all that, but whenever you hear these people being interviewed, in the law of averages, somebody looks like Mr. or Mrs. Unhappy, and it looks like two of them are getting on better than three of them. So again, it's an exploration, and I understand people are working through their emotional issues, and they maybe can't see it from the viewpoint I see it from, and they've got to go through that process and understand. But I just feel it's sad that I didn't get thrown out. I chose to leave from this dating group today. But I thought it's sad that the female admin defended the man over seeing what I was saying. And of course, I don't type as well as I actually speak. but I thought it was a very interesting conversation to have and a discussion to put out there. And so let me see what anyone else is saying. It seems like a lot of you kind of agree with me, which is really nice. So I probably won't leave the comments open at the end of this, because by the law of averages, it just takes up a lot of time and you get people who will disagree seriously with me and try and troll me. So I will probably try to not leave any comment sections open. I think this chat will probably show up. But thank you for listening. Thank you for your sharing. From my perspective, we have to go in to heal this deep, sacred sexual trauma inside ourselves, which is stored in our cell memory. It's stored in our DNA. It's stored in, our bodily parts. People often wonder, why do I have hemorrhoids? Why do I have vaginal issues? And all of this goes back to trauma that's been held there, whether it's, like I said, whether it's ancestral trauma, whether it's past life trauma, whether it's inner child trauma. And people are frightened of their pain. They're frightened that if they go back to those memories, the pain will never end. Well, I can tell you from 20 years of being a therapist and going into my own trauma, it does clear, it does go away. It is a process. And you will release that, and your body will show itself in a healing, benevolent way to you, and a sensitivity that means your barometer of what you tolerate will lessen. Yes, that might smaller the gap of the people who you're emotionally available to, but you don't want to keep attracting toxic, dysfunctional relationships. There comes a point where you have to love yourself enough to say, enough. I don't want to be in a toxic, abusive, verbally, mentally, or physically or emotionally relationship anymore. I deserve better than that. So I will leave you with that question to share with others, or if you've watched this because it might touch you deeply. I work with people clearing emotional trauma on a very deep level. Tomorrow evening, being the 4th, on my Facebook business page, which is Andrea Foulkes, Pastlife Regression Intuitive Visionary, at 7 o'clock, we're going to be doing a guided meditation into the facets of abundance. And that isn't just about money. It's not about money. It's abundance of many things, abundance of health, abundance of healthy relationships. It's opening up to abundance. And we're going to be doing a guided journey on that if you'd like to join us. And other than that, subscribe to my newsletter. I think you have to hit the bell to subscribe to my channel. I will start making more videos for YouTube again. So much love, many blessings, and thank you all for your lovely comments. Much love and many blessings for now. Thank you all. Bye bye. Have a lovely afternoon. Bye.